very encouraging firstly at the AU summit back in March that we had 44 countries initially signing up, and then subsequent to that meeting another 5 countries, so we're up to 49 out of 55 African countries have signed up to the deal. But clearly those signatures need to be ratified in a democratic process for ratification through member states' parliaments. So it's a period of consultation, and it's a period also where we have to make the case very strongly about the ratification, the importance of this agreement to be implemented. My organisation's estimates of the gains, as you commented on the 52% of intra-Africa trade, we've actually carried out some simulations also in the East Africa community and the benefits for that, and we find that intra-EAC trade with the rest of Africa would increase by 66%. Which is quite a large number, actually. We're very optimistic about this agreement. You're quite right to flag that some of the large countries have been initially rather more hesitant, so South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt. We find that quite strange in terms of our analysis, because it seems to be that some of the larger countries would be some of the major beneficiaries from this agreement as well. So I think we still need to make the economic case for the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that involves not only making that case to governments, in the vast majority they've agreed with this process, we need to make it also to civil society and the private sector.
Andrew, allow me to jump right in there. Now, you just said that it would benefit most of the big economies. Of course, Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, most of these countries that have actually already been trading worldwide or globally. But let's bring it back to a conversation that has to do with small and medium enterprises. Just in March, when this deal was being signed in Kigali, much of the side conversations were on furthering SMEs to actually have an easy way of trading across borders, no non-tariff barriers, even non-tariff barriers gone. But when you look at that, doesn't it make it more easy for actually intercontinental companies to have a bigger footprint on the continent and maybe overshadow the SMEs that we're looking to promote?
I think in general you'll find that smaller firms don't tend to export much currently across Africa. Export tends to be dominated by the larger players. The Continental Free Trade Area isn't really focused either on SMEs or the larger firms. I think we basically all need to be trading more amongst ourselves. So if you look at the last enterprise survey here in Rwanda, for example, I believe it was only 20% of firms reported at all that they were currently exporting. So we clearly need to increase that percentage across the board. Export across the African market is a good way to increase productivity. It's a good way of also increasing output in general, economies of scale. So, I mean, I think it's definitely the way to go. In my recent presentation I made on making the case for the AfCFTA, I also stressed that I feel quite strongly that over the last 50 years or so, we've seen that extra regional trading arrangements, the preferential kind of agreements that we have with the United States under AGOA, or whether it's the Everything But Arms agreement with the European Union, or even India and China, which also have preferential agreements for LDC countries, we find that generally those haven't delivered on the kind of results that we would have liked to see. And there might be multiple reasons for that. I think partially it's in the way those agreements, those preferential market access agreements are designed. It's partially also a lack of supply side response for our firms. But in general, I think the principle is that the intra-regional trade is a far more dynamic part of our international trade structure. And it has far more potential to help with industrialization and faster growth of our economies.
Andrew, an interesting point there that you did touch the AGOA, and let's look at it from a Rwandan perspective. Just on Monday, what was once a threat became a reality. Rwanda was banned from exporting textiles to the United States.
Suspended, yeah.
Suspended.
Yeah.
Well, the words could be used interchangeably, but let's focus more on that beat that now it cannot export textiles to the United States. It still has the other rights, but the textiles beat, no. So do you see if the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is enacted as soon as we would hope to, does it put something in play for...
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the problem with the preferential market access of the kind of we see here with AGOA is that it is concessional. Right. And those concessions can be taken away, as has been the case now with Rwanda for the textile sector. That's somewhat regrettable in this particular case because actually Rwanda sustains a trade deficit with the United States. So it's not a case exactly of United States being fearful of a trade imbalance in this particular case, as in India, in the case of China or with the European Union. In this case, they have a surplus. I think the decision was disappointing, but in actual fact, for the Rwandan economy, there's not an enormous amount at stake because very little of the exports to the US were going under AGOA anyway. Of the $44 million of goods to the US last year, only around just under 2 million, I believe, went under AGOA in any case. So it's a shame for the companies involved, obviously, affected by that ban. But this is why we're making so strongly the argument for the Continental Free Trade Area, because this is non-concessional trading arrangements. And it's with countries with more similar levels of productivity and income per capita, in which case there's more potential for firms to do well in those markets. Accessing the Western markets or the high-income country markets, or indeed India and China, where we see also that trade has been rather one-sided. There's large deficit in Eastern Africa with India and China, for example. Accessing those markets has proven to be quite difficult, and we feel that there's a lot more scope for mutually beneficial intra-African trade. That will strengthen the African economies, and it will allow us to integrate more fully into the global market, perhaps at a later stage. But for the time being, I think we need to put our efforts on consolidating the African Continental Free Trade Area.